Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Penang Institute. And for those who have been here before, welcome back. My name is Fawaz Abdulaziz. I'm an analyst with the History and Regional Studies Department of Penang Institute. They came to Asia bearing the authority of the mighty East India Company and the flag of the British Empire. But these Englishmen also carried secrets which they had sworn under dire penalties never to reveal. They were members of a fraternity called the Freemasons, whose membership crossed national, ethnic, and religious boundaries. In 1803, the brothers set up the first lodge in Malaya, located in Penang. In the years to come, many prominent citizens would wear the apron of a Masonic lodge. How influential were the Freemasons? What role did the lodge play in their lives? We have with us today Mr. Godfrey Moore, who will be talking about the importance of Freemasonry in establishing the British colonies and developing trade. He will also offer insights into this historic fraternity and its origins. And what I didn't know until recently is that Mr. Moore himself has been a Freemason for 40 years. He held the position of worshipful master in 2 lodges and was a high-ranking district officer. We did not know how many people would turn up for this event, but looking at the composition of the audience, I'm wondering how many of us are Freemasons. Can we raise our hands? No, I'm just kidding. So without further ado, let me call Mr. Moore to come and talk about his book. Do we address you as Godfrey Moore or Alan? Is he okay?
Yes. You can hear me? I was scared to turn it on earlier in case I went to the bathroom and you could hear me, so I turned it on. Thank you very much for coming out this afternoon to listen to me. And I'd like to thank the Penang Institute for inviting me here. I'm very grateful. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm going to speed through it fairly quickly. Wait a minute, where's my slide thing? And then at the end, you have a chance to ask some questions. Who were these people who made oaths, swore to brotherhood, and came out here? Who were these people? And we're very suspicious of them. A lot of people wondered where they came from and what they were doing out here. So today we're going to explore where they came from, why they came. So let's start with our first slide. So I'm going to go through these 3 portions here, which is first of all, the role of the Freemasons Lodge. What role did they play for the Freemasons that came and for society in general? What were they up to here? Were they up to mischief? We don't know. Then I'm going to explore the origins of Freemasonry. Where did it arise from and how did it develop? Because it changed very much and is still changing. Then part 3 is the bit that I'm sure you're all waiting for, which is the secrets. Yes, so I suspect that half of you are coming here, maybe 3/4, and going, I'm not at all interested in the bloody history of the thing, but I am interested to know what they get up to when they lock the doors. So I might slip up and let out some secrets. So you better listen very carefully to what I'm saying. So let's get on with it. I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, but I'm an old man, so we take a long time to say things, and takes you a day to get your socks on in the morning, you know. So here we go. So Freemasonry spread very rapidly after its formation. From 1700 onwards, it spread like wildfire across the whole of the world, in fact. And it's almost within a lifetime. Almost within a life. Now, you see all these are actually the countries that they were in. You've got to remember, a ship used to take 6 months to get here. So when you think that this was all achieved within a lifetime, but they're showing countries, but within those countries are many lodges. So it's not just, oh, I must tell you about, sorry, I forgot all about, I'm going to tell you my title of my book, I forgot. Most important thing you should remember is the title of the book, Aprons in Asia. And of course, we all assume when you're in Freemasonry, everybody knows what you're talking about. But for most people, they probably look at the title of the book and go, what? Aprons in Asia? These aprons is what modern Freemasons wear in various different guises. Some are more ornate and some are very plain. But these originated from the leather apron that used to be worn by the stonemason to protect themselves. So when they're chipping away at the old stone, the leather apron would protect them. So this is where the apron originally came from. I forgot to tell you, but always forget the best bit. Anyway, there we go. So let's go on. So they rapidly spread across. Now, how did it spread? How did they come? What made this rapid explosion? What set them suddenly from 17? Well, the first Grand Lodge was formed in 1717. English Grand Lodge was the first. Then the Dutch and the French followed a few years later. So within that short time, they already been right across the world. They ended up with in about 39 countries by 1900. So it's quite fat. Now, the first meetings of the lodges were done by regiments, soldiers. And you were in a regiment, you could belong to a lodge. And I should explain, a lodge is not a building. We tend to think of lodges as buildings, but they're not. A lodge is a group of people. They're recognized group of, recognized by a grand lodge somewhere. So you are a lodge and it's a group of people. So within the regiment, most of the officers would belong to a military lodge. So when they were posted in one place for a time, they would hold their meetings. And then when they moved, the lodge moved with them. It wasn't a permanent place. So it just enabled those soldiers to still continue practicing Freemasonry even while they were traveling. But this wasn't really the reason that Freemasonry spread so rapidly. It was a result of this company, the East India Company. And who's heard of the East India Company? I presume most of you have. Yeah, it's a very fascinating company. You should read some books on it because there's a lot to know about it. But the East India Company was formed in 1600, December 1600, in the time of Queen Elizabeth. And the objective was to get trade in what they called the East Indies, which is all where we are today, go down the East Indies because the spice trade was down there. Well, the spice trade had been started by the Portuguese, or sorry, not started, I should say. The Portuguese had tried to muscle in on the spice trade, and then the Dutch had come along and kicked the Portuguese out. And so the English wanted to come along, and by then, a bit late already, because the Dutch wouldn't let anybody in the Straits of Malacca, as you know, because they were already in Malacca, very well established, both sides. So the British actually went into India first. I have to say that a little thing about the East India Company, it was the first sign that we got of capitalism. At its worst, I might say, because it was no restraints, right? This was blank capitalism. And they did very much in actually getting rid of the feudal system, both here and in India, because suddenly you had a company. Shareholders were in London. They weren't running the company. It's not like the old days where you had a merchant who ran his ship backwards and forwards. No, this was people that you didn't know who put money into a joint stock company. And then they had what they called a court of directors. And that court of directors then had employees like Francis Light. Now, Francis Light didn't actually work for the East India Company, but he was a subcontractor. He was called a country trader. So the country traders sailed around the region, picking up small items and took them to the main ships, which were the ones, the big East India men that used to fly between here and London. So the East India Company was very influential. As I say, Francis Light worked. There was a subcontractor to him. Now, he wasn't the only person that came in. Who came? There were Englishmen come. Englishmen came out mainly to make their fortune, like Francis Light. He was a young man when he came over. He saw an opportunity to come out to Asia and make his fortune. And many of the people, I came out to make my fortune, but I didn't find it anywhere. But anyway, I'm told you can make a fortune. So he came out to make a fortune, and so did a lot of young men. I want to now ask you to look behind your seats, the ones who've got there, and you will see two signs. Now, if you have the skull and crossbones, if you have a skull and crossbones, I don't know how many of the seats had. Put your hands up who has a skull and crossbones. Okay. Well, I'm sorry, folks, you're all dead. Because 1 in 3 of the men who came out here, they were young, fit men, but when they came out here, they died of one of these diseases. One of these diseases, cholera, typhoid, killed them off. It wasn't a very safe thing to do. A lot of guys, look, people died on the ships coming over. In fact, when the settlers went to Australia, the first ships that went over, 42 people died on the way. And they said, that's fantastic. Only 42 people died on the way over. So you can imagine how many people used to die on these ships coming over. Then you could get shipwrecked. No Suez Canal, so you had to go around the Cape of Good Hope. A lot of people lost. And the worst, you might get caught by pirates. And you as a young Englishman would find yourself a slave to one of the sultans or princes around the region for the rest of your life. However, not all bad news, is it? Penang was considered one of the most healthiest of the places to be. But despite that, look how many of your governors died in office. They must have dreamed of going back to England, tending the garden, smelling the flowers. They died of disease soon after they got here. Even poor old Francis Light died of a second dose of malaria. Stanford Raffles, when he went to Java the first time, his wife died. When he was posted the second time, he lost all his children bar one. So it wasn't very healthy. However, people did survive and they stayed, but this was not the end of their troubles. A lot of them were in loneliness. They were in isolation. And in those days, you couldn't pick up a phone. I mean, you couldn't pick up a phone and say, Mother, I don't like it here. It's very hot and the food burns my mouth and I can't understand a word anybody's talking to me about. So you couldn't do that. You were in isolation and left on your own. If you were lucky, however, one of the old hands who'd been here a long time would take pity on you, and he'd invite you along for a drink and with some friends. And if he liked the look of you, and he thought you weren't a drunk, he would say, "Why don't you join the Freemasons' Lodge?" And they would join the Freemasons' Lodge, and immediately you had friends and fellowship and people that we call brothers. In fact, your first lodge you join is called your mother lodge, because it's like joining a family. So young man now has friends, he has people he can chat to. He also has the opportunity to make business contacts. Remember, the leading people in the town, sometimes the governors, it's not up there anymore, the governors would be members. So you would meet all the influential merchants, you would meet all the important people in town, which was fantastic for business or your career. Nowadays, you're not allowed to join a lodge for the sake of business. But in those days, it was fine to do that. The next one was security. Remember, you've got there was no British embassy or anybody to look after you. There's no social security, no police force, nothing. So you came, and the lodge, by tradition, always helps people who are members. It's part of their charity, is looking after the members. So, for instance, if your cargo was swept off the deck of the ship and you lost it all, you might well be loaned the money to go and buy new produce to sell to get you back on your feet. Or worse comes the worst, you were attacked in the street, you lost everything, you had broken arm or something, they would get you on a ship back to England. So you were taken care of by the lodge. Its other important thing was as a conduit for information. These ships were going up and down around the region, up into the Middle East, even coming from America. Information was coming in all the time. And sometimes bad information. You hear, for instance, that the pepper harvest in Aceh had got washed away. So you wouldn't send your ship over to the ports to pick up peppers. And if you had a warehouse full of peppers, you knew you could get a better price for them. So that information was coming in all the time. And also under the Dutch, anybody Dutch here? Oh dear, I better be very careful. Under the Dutch, they were always rebelling in Indonesia. So you wouldn't want to send your ship over if there was fighting going on. So this information was very important to everybody. But there was another aspect, and this has been neglected because basically no one's done much research into Freemasonry, the normal historians. And unfortunately, Masonic historians tend to just repeat whatever they've been told. But now they're finding out that the presence of the lodges around, not only around the region, but around the world, actually enabled Britain to build up its network, its trading network, and its influences. It was much more important than anybody's really thought about. And it's only been in the last 10 years that researchers, by historians and by academics, have pulled this out. So we now know. You see, if you take, let's say locally, the Sultan would marry a princess across in, let's say, Java, and he would have a lot of contacts across the water. So the network of the merchants and elites here who were dealing with trade were very strong, family ties. So they were involved long before the Europeans came here. They were involved in slavery, opium, wood, gold, and elephants. Even elephants were being transported. So it would be very difficult for a foreigner to come in here and start trading. But it was the lodges that gave that network to the traders. And this is why they now believe that even the British Empire might have been helped by the, so don't all pull faces when I say that, British Empire, might have been responsible for starting that. There was another part. Many of the men that came over were from the upper classes in England, and they'd all been to the public schools. In England, public schools means fee-paying schools. I don't know why we say that, but they call public schools, but they're fee-paying for the rich, like Eton, Harrow, Rugby, Winchester. These schools are well known for producing, well, they taught boys a sense of fair play and honor. They produced men of incredible bravery. On the other hand, they produced people with a sense of their own superiority and misogyny. I have to say that. What this had the effect of doing is, in England by about the 1850s, Freemasonry was the scene of the elites. It had been very mixed earlier on, but by the 1850s, it was really the gentleman class inside Freemasonry. And when it came to Asia, they couldn't afford really to, there weren't enough Europeans to fill the lodges. So they decided they allow people from more humble beginnings to become Masons. In that way, they created, they taught them the etiquette and manners of the upper classes. And as you can see there on the right-hand side, the dinner. And they used to get up dressed for dinner, just like a regimental officer's mess or a grand home in England. And they'd sit there in their finery and drink a toast to the king. Well, I have to tell you, we still get dressed up in dinner suits. And we still drink a toast in Malaysia to the local king. But in Singapore, they dress a toast to King Charles and the president, I believe, the two together. So by this manner, the values of the ruling classes and later on the British Empire were instilled into the members. And as we got local members in, they were also instilled. And if you meet some of the older people, they were really almost, they spoke very nice English, beautifully, because they learned from these British people in the lodges. You can go to India and find people speaking like that. So this was another aspect of it. Let's just pop more locally now and just say what happened in Penang. It was 30 years later. Some Masons here claim that Francis Light was a Mason, but I don't think that's true. But by 30 years later, these two people were part of a group of men who started the first lodge, Neptune. And Burchett Bohm was actually not working for the East India Company, but he was an independent publisher. He brought in the first printing press into Malaya, and he actually didn't get on very well with the administrators who wanted to censor him. So he used to leave blank columns. And so they look at the newspaper, and then the administrators got so annoyed with him because it was showed how much his work was being censored. And they shut him down a few times. And then Thomas McQuaid was a police magistrate here, but he went on to be the sheriff of New South Wales. And he was a friend of Raffles, actually. And then that lodge failed again. And then it started a second one. You probably recognize the name up there. Probably some of you even drove down it today to get here. I don't know. And so there was quite a few famous people attached to the lodges. The lodges continued. They had different buildings. All of them have gone now, but we have this beautiful building, which I think you all know. Building it's quite late for a Freemasons building. We have a lot of buildings that are much older than this, but this is a beautiful example of Art Deco. The land cost $4,500. $4,000 Malay dollars, and the building itself cost around $31,000. A bit more today, I think, to build something like that. But it's a beautiful building, and if you get the chance to look around inside, then do so. They usually open up at least once or twice a year. When they were renovating a few years back, they pulled down the ceiling. It used to have one of these false ceilings like this, and they pulled it down, and on the right there, you can see the vaulted ceiling, and it's been cleaned up and repainted and lit, and it's absolutely beautiful. Yeah, a lovely building. Now, I'm going to quickly go through this because we've run out of time, but the Freemasons have always taken an active role in the communities and looked after minorities. I think, what's his name? James Logan was probably a Mason, and he looked after the rubber, I think it was rubber plantations, or one of the plantation workers, the Indian workers. And this was a thing that you found. You all know Raffles was so against slavery. Financing schools, Lord Dalhousie in India set up the first women's school. I won't go through it all because it'll take too long time. But you all know about Raffles and a lot of people who preserved the cultures in Asia. So why do these men who are working for what we can only call a rapacious capitalist company, why did they put so much into the community? Why? Well, it comes from their background. So we're going into part 2 now. Part 2 is the origins of Freemasonry. And a lot of Freemasons like to say, oh, we come back for the ancient Egyptians, and we quite like all that. But all these, the Greek mystery schools, the Knights Templar, the guilds, you can ask me questions later on about those if you want, but these are given as possible origins. But the one that the Grand Lodge of England, most people agree on, is that they came from the stonemasons' lodges. And these were the forerunners of the trade unions. They looked after the rights of the workers, made sure they got their full salaries. All this was done for, and they had benefits. You know, if one of the workers fell off the ladder and was killed, they would look after the widow and the children. So there was welfare running right through this for a long time. Here you see the code of conduct. Now, in the old lodges, this was a code of conduct between both for the employer and the employee. They had initiation ceremonies and apprenticeships. So you went in as a boy and were trained. And the workers were graded by degrees, which as their skill set went up, they got an extra degree. And then they had signs, secret signs and passwords. Now, a lot of that has been adopted by modern Freemasonry. Now, why did these guys need secret signs and passwords? The reason was, in those days, there was no paper qualification. So when you went from one site, let's say you're building a cathedral down, well, usually 100 miles away, another cathedral. When you turned up, the foreman would want to know what your skill set was. You couldn't have somebody say, well, I'll build it, and then the whole ceiling falls down because he's got no skill. So everybody had to know what your skill was. By the password and by the sign that you gave, you actually identified that. And that is where this password, and we still have them in modern Freemasonry. We have passwords and we have secret signs. The stonemasons did very well for many years, did very well indeed. But eventually, they stopped building any more cathedrals. There's a limit to how many cathedrals you want. If you go through Europe, there's dozens and dozens of these cathedrals, and in England as well, plenty of cathedrals. But the church was then involved in a fight between the Protestants and the Catholics, so they had better things to do. And castles became obsolete because the artillery had got so good that they could punch a hole through the wall. So with that trade diminishing, what happened was the lodges lost members. And they looked around and said, well, how can we keep going? Because there's no more masons coming in, because there's no work for them. And so they then decided to invite lay people to join. And they called them free and accepted masons. Free and accepted, because they weren't part of what they called operative masonry. So operative masonry were the guys who chipped away at the wood, and the others were the Freemasons, were the ones who sat there. This story is not quite true in my view, but what I will say is Freemasonry was adapted from this. So let's move on. You've got a traditional craft, and then something happened. What's our timing? We got till 4. Then something happened. And that was, there were changes in Europe that altered everything entirely. And a lot of you probably know this as better or as much as me, but there was a big change in Europe where we had what they called the Renaissance, where there were enough rich people to patronize the arts. So there was a blossoming of arts with Botticelli, Michelangelo, Raphael. All these artists were now employed. They got to know about Roman and Greek civilization. So that's why in England they kept building everything with pillars. It was all they just picked it off from the Romans. Then you had a scientific revolution because you'd had people like Copernicus and Galileo. Then you had the invention of printing in 1450, printing from movable type. This meant mass production of books, so everybody was becoming more educated. And then you had the Protestant Reformation, where Luther protested against the corruption of the Christian church. So you had a split. So all that was going on. And these ideas spilled over into the next century. You have what was called the Enlightenment. And along came people like René Descartes and Rousseau and Voltaire. All these people had new ideas about the church, about God, about government, about the monarchy. All these ideas were coming around. Look at them, the liberty, freedom of religion, logic, science, not so. You can imagine the excitement that was going on. And that excitement led to a lot of clubs, societies, discussion groups. And they called them salons in France, but in England they were in the coffee shops. Not like today where everybody's in Starbucks not talking to each other. There was lively discussions about philosophy, about religion. Did God exist or not exist? Should divine right give a king a position? All these things were coming up. So much excitement. And we think it's not just a few groups, not just like 100 of them. There were thousands of these discussion groups. Here's a few of the groups that did exist. The Kit Kat Club had the Prime Minister Horace Walpole in a member. So was a couple of those philosophers. I've forgotten which one. So all these clubs existed. And then in the background was Freemasonry, which was different because it operated behind closed doors, which made people very suspicious of it. But it was there all the time. And what happened to set us all off? And do you remember me saying this whole explosion came in 1717? It was because there was a formation of a Grand Lodge. Originally, these guys, they were 4 lodges that met at St. Paul's courtyard, and they were very near each other, and they just said, why don't we get together once a year, have a nice banquet, enjoy ourselves? And that's how it started. No big plan. But then after they started, lots of people said, like, we would like to join. So different lodges started to come, and they formed, which was only a lodge of London and Westminster, and eventually that became a Grand Lodge. And so this was where we started off. Now, this was a bit dangerous because you remember all the ideas that were on the board: liberty, God, the monarchy. Why don't we have a government why don't we have voting? Wow, that's a new idea. So these things were pretty revolutionary. They're very radical ideas. And having them behind closed doors made people very suspicious. And it turned out they were right, because if you look at the 2 pictures at the top, a bit later on in 1785, I think somebody's going to tell me I'm wrong, somewhere around there, you had, first of all, the rebellion in America, and that was led by Freemasons. So the British king was fighting an army led by the Freemasons, and the Freemasons ended up being a very large part of writing the Constitution of the America. Then, within, I think it was 5 to 10 years, we had the French Revolution just across the channel. So again, these revolutionary ideas, and suddenly there they are, cutting the heads off of kings. And again, Napoleon wasn't a Freemason, but his brother was, and so were members of his family. So the Freemasons were involved in that revolution. They were involved in the revolutions down in South America. They led the revolutions, and closer to home, in the Philippines. The Philippines Revolution was totally led by Freemasons. And they not only fought against the Spain and the church, they actually fought against the Americans later on. They were all Freemasons. And yet, English Freemasonry did not waver. It stayed firmly behind the king and eventually the British Empire. And that's a story for another day. I'll tell you another time. So we're going on now to the bit that everybody's been waiting for, which is the hidden side of Freemasonry. So what is Freemasonry? Well, before I tell you what it is, I'll tell you what it isn't. It isn't a sinister cult. The leader of British Freemasonry is a member of the royal family, the Duke of Kent. Now, he's a lovely old man, but he doesn't have the skills as an orator to persuade me to drink poisoned Kool-Aid, which Jim James did for the Christian cult in South America. We don't separate families like the Scientologists and avoid them. And if you want to leave Freemasonry, no one cuts your throat or hangs you under a bridge. It's not a cult. It's not a secret worldwide fraternity either that's trying to take over the world. Everybody puts Illuminati down. Oh, the Illuminati, you're part of it. I've seen it written on the walls. Illuminati lasted like 4 years in Germany and went out in 1785. It doesn't exist. People may use the name, but Illuminati was never part of Freemasonry. But there we go. There is no... Freemasonry is run by separate grand lodges all over the world, and none of them talk to each other, or vaguely talk to each other, but there is no international body holding Freemasonry together. In fact, well, I'm putting words into their mouth, but I think it's true. Every Grand Master likes to keep his fiefdom to himself. So he's not allowing anybody else. He doesn't want to know about those people over there. So no worldwide conspiracy. Is it an undercover Zionist? Well, of course not. There are Jews in Freemasonry. There's one in Singapore. I don't know whether there's any in the district. This district, I don't know. There's nothing to stop a Jew joining, but we have Muslims, we have Catholics, we have Baptists and whatnots in Hindus, because it's open to all religions. So no, nothing to do with Zionism. It's not a new religion. We don't worship anybody. We have a prayer at the beginning and at the end of the ceremony. And that's about all. There's no worshipping anybody else. We have, you sometimes hear, we talk about the grand geometrician of the world. If you look in the grand, that is not a God that we're worshiping. What that is when you do your prayer, you bring to mind your own God. If it's Allah, you think of Allah. If you think it's Jesus, you think of Jesus. If it's Krishna, you think of Krishna. It's the reason it's a very generalized word. But nobody's sitting there saying, oh, pray to this. No, nonsense. It's not a black magic coven. We don't drink blood. We don't have sex orgies. We're all male anyway, so that means there's only a few that would be interested. So no sex orgies. Some of our, a lot of the buildings got a reputation for being haunted, because I think in the old days they used to have candles and people could see shadows. What do they call that, Tiffy? What do they call them in Malay? Rumahantu, yes. So they nearly all the lodges have this idea they're haunted just because of these late night meetings. So let's enter the world of Freemasonry. I'm going to just give me a second. Tiffy, what happened to him? There was also something inside one of the books, piece of paper. It was inside one of these books. Yeah, there's a. Oh. I have to do it from memory because I can't. I'm just going to give you a clue. It's a single sheet of paper, actually. Okay. I'll sit here. So I'm now sitting on the Master Lodge. Brother Inner Guard, you will see the door is secure.
The lodge is guarded and secured, Master.
Brother Inner Guard, do you swear that everybody here is a resident of Penang Island and of good moral character?
I believe so, Worship.
And have they taken an oath not to reveal any of the secrets that I may impart on them? Well, then I will declare this lodge of Penang Institute now open. So similar is not accurate, but it's something like we would do. So once you open a lodge, then you have your actual meeting. So let's just go on to what Freemasonry is about. As I told you, we take a lot of our structure from the stonemasons' lodges. So if you look on here, you will see the square and the compasses, which are on every building. And the square is a sign of stability and honesty. The compasses have a purpose. They circumscribe your morals. So we use these as analogies or symbols for what we're going to do. So if you see on the right here, up there on the right there, you see the level. So a level is to check in when you're making a building in the old days to see that everything is horizontal. But in Freemasonry, this is actually used as a sign of equality. Everybody starts off as equal, whatever your race or whatever your religion or whatever, you're equal. Then the other side here is a plumb rule, which tests whether a wall is vertical. So again, it suggests to us an uprightness in your character. So are you a man of uprightness? Then we show you sorry, I'm pointing down here. You can't see there. I'm a stupid man, I am. Up here, you see the 24-inch gauge. This was before everybody went metric, so it's all still 24-inch gauge. And what that does is symbolizes breaking up your day. So part of the day would be spent in labor and rest, and part of the day would be spent in helping someone as best you can. And then the third part of the day should be spent in prayer to the Lord or to some sort of spiritual time. So in other words, you don't divert your whole life to one thing, but you have a balanced life. So these are the lessons that we have, all these different tools and different lectures to instill in people an idea of how they should behave, how they should disport themselves. Here we see the gavel and the chisel. Now, there up the top, you see a very rough stone before it's been knocked into proper shape. We use the same idea. The chisel is to knock off all the extra bits. And in terms of a human being, all your unbecoming thoughts would be taken off slowly over the years. So the time should be, by the time you've spent 40 years in Freemasonry like me, you should be like the perfect ashlar up there. My wife will confirm. Okay, I have a few knobs that need to get knocked off, but that's the objective is to turn you into a better person, basically. And this is the whole objective right the way through on your journey through Freemasonry. Now the initiation ceremony. Okay, you're all sworn to secrecy, right? So I can't let you know anymore. Okay, if you see the man on the left has had all his outer clothes removed. He's now dressed in a white outfit tunic. This is really to show that when he comes in, it doesn't matter whether he's rich, whether he's the CEO of a company. In this case, he would have had his jewelry taken off, his wig probably. Some have wigs in those days. Everything is removed so that when he comes into the lodge that first time, he comes in just bringing himself. Who are you? Are you a good person? And you are equal to everybody, no matter what you are outside. And in some cases, people can be royalty. But when they come in, now you also notice he's wearing a blindfold. The blindfold has two purposes. One of the reasons is he is blindfolded until he takes an oath to keep a secret. Now, there was very good reason in the old days for this, because once that blindfold came off, he could look around and he could identify the people in the lodge. And in the old days, that could be very dangerous, depending on your religion or your politics. So he was now sworn to secrecy and having taken an oath, so he was allowed to see. But there's a symbolic attachment to this as well. When you have the blindfold on, you're in a state of darkness. You cannot see. When that blindfold is taken off, the light comes in, and it's the light of knowledge. And this signifies that you have now entered into Freemasonry, and you're now seeing the light and the knowledge that you are encouraged to acquire over the years. And that is the reason they're blindfolded. This layout in here is not like a modern lodge, so I don't have any qualms in showing you that. But basically, that's the initiation ceremony that everybody goes through in a Freemason's lodge. Now, there are 3 degrees in modern Freemasonry. The first is the entered apprentice level, which is when you've been initiated, that is the first one that you go to, entered apprentice. And as you can see, it's really more of an informative degree. It teaches you humility. There are lessons in virtue, morality. This permeates all the time through Freemasonry. What you should be, how you should behave. And the last one is compassion, and charity is really hammered home in the first degree. I cannot tell you how that's done, but it's made you think that you may one day be in a state of poverty and you need help. And so the charity is very big in Freemasonry. And he just gets that white envelope, white apron, which is a sign of purity, and it's made from a lamb's skin. So that's your first apron. Not like that highly decorated one I had on. That. Your second one is the second degree. It has 2 rosettes on. Now, in this one, which is the intermediate degree, the emphasis is on continuing to educate yourself. You don't stop just because you're an adult and you don't think you need to learn. As a Freemason, you're encouraged to learn. And so the lesson in this one is very much how to improve yourself. So that's the second degree. In the old days, and unfortunately it doesn't happen now, but in the old days they had lectures. You remember we talked about the Enlightenment and all the discussion groups? Well, the lodges used to have all these lectures. We do have lectures, but only in specialized lodges. But in the old days, every lodge had a lecture. So that a lot of the working men who joined in England joined for an education, because they would have somebody there to talk about geometry, astronomy, all kinds of physics. So the working man actually got an education when he joined the lodge. I say, unfortunately, it went away, but that was the time. Then there comes the third degree. The third degree is all about honor, fidelity, and a reminder that you're going to die, which at my age isn't very welcome, but I have to sit there, don't I? So you are reminded that you are going to die, and if you want to make something of your life or you want to be thought of well, you better start changing now before it's too late. So these are the 3 degrees, which is the basic degrees that most Freemasons go through. There are 3 pillars, which, again, you can see how the Enlightenment ideas of architecture came in. So we have the 3 degrees. We have these 3 columns, Ionic, and I forgot what the other one is, Ionic, and the last one, Corinthian. So these are the 3 pillars that we talk about. But the main thing is the 3 principles, which are brotherly love, which means caring about people, not just people in the lodge, but caring about humanity as a whole. Then you have relief, which is charity, looking after the community, looking after those in need. And this is very important to Freemasonry. And then the last thing is truth. Do you have integrity? Are you truthful? And these are important things that do we all live up to these? Sometimes no. Sometimes no. Not everybody does. But they are reminded at every meeting of the kind of man they should be. So some will absorb the lessons and some don't. So don't come to me afterwards and I say, I knew a Freemason, he did me out of 20 ringgit the other day. No, we try to live up to it. So we've done 3 things today. One, we talked about Freemasonry as a global Greece, if you like, to help the Britain extend its network. We talked about the origins of the stonemasons, basically from the people who chipped away the stone to the ideas of the Enlightenment. And then I hope I've persuaded you that there's nothing sinister about Freemasonry. And it's really a brotherhood full of what I think are principles and good values. We have a saying in Freemasonry, we make good men better. You quite often hear this in a Freemason. We make good men better. And I think we do. Thank you. Shall I turn this one off and use that? Or yeah. I can't sit down with this in my pocket. There I am.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore, for the very interesting and engaging presentation on Freemasons. I think I speak for a lot of people here that we learned a lot, and we somehow, the thing is, I feel like we somehow got very close to um, sensing what Freemasonry is, yet we're still so far. You know, there's still a question in my mind. What really? I mean, so we might. I might ask you to give a personal take on this. My first question is made up of two parts, actually. You've been a Freemason for 40 years. So the first part of my question is, what drew you to become a member of a lodge, to enter Freemasonry 40 years ago? As a young man, what was it that made you want, made you curious and made you want to study and practice Freemasonry? The second part of the question is, what kept you coming back? A lot of people might, for example, might convert to a religion or might become a member of an association, and they would leave it. But what is it that drew you in the first place, and what kept you coming back? Maybe those are the first set of questions that I have for you.
Well, I think my answer to the first part may surprise many people. I hadn't really thought about joining Freemasonry at all. And I knew nothing about it. And I was in Singapore, and I was invited to by a friend who I used to ride a motorbike, and we used to ride around the region on this motorbike. And he one day invited me for lunch at the Masonic Club. In Singapore, they actually had a club attached to the Masonic building. So they served lunches and dinners there. And so he invited me along to talk to me about Freemasonry. And he gave me a long talk about allegories and symbols. And I didn't really understand much of what he was talking about, frankly. But my goodness, they served a great chicken curry. And I'm embarrassed, or slightly embarrassed to say, I joined it because I thought this is a good club to join. I can have chicken curry like this every week. My office was just across the road. So I went in not for what I would call the good reasons. We didn't have, my excuse is we didn't have internet in those days. So there was nowhere I could read about it. But anyway, it wasn't for any high-minded ideals that I went. However, I surprised myself by finding it very interesting. I was at the time working in advertising, which is very stressful. I was under a lot of pressure a lot of the time, and in a way, I guess we could say we're a bit superficial. You know, we work on a campaign this week and then a new campaign the next week, and it's all gone, and nothing's very solid. And I think what I found in the lodge, in a general thing, was this feeling that when I went to the lodge after work, and I sat down in the lodge, and all around me were these boards of men who'd been Freemasons since 18-something. They're all in Singapore. All lodges have these list of the masters of lodges. And I used to find it, I don't know whether you say spiritually, spiritually comforting. Yeah, I think that's the word, spiritually comforting, to be there knowing that men, good men, had sat in the same seats for 100 and something years. And so I think that's what attracted me to it, was the contrast between my life outside and inside. Of course, you know, there are so many aspects of, I think in my book, I talk about in my book, some men are attracted to the camaraderie. You know, there's a lot of, you make friends. We always have a dinner after the meeting. There's a lot of friendship that goes on inside a lodge, and a lot of drinking around the bar. Not so much now, but in the old days, when I started, my God, there was drinking. Well, there's a few in Penang, I think, who can keep pace too. But people are more scared to drink because of driving. But a lot of people join a lodge simply and are quite happy with that. And I see nothing wrong with that, because the other aspect that appealed to me was I met people from a different world. I was mixing with photographers, models, filmmakers, a different crowd. And then I'd come to the lodge and I'd meet people who were lawyers, doctors, all kinds of people who I never would deal with. And so you have this mix of people of, and I have to say, wealth. Some people in the lodge are extremely wealthy, and some people are struggling. I mean, we have people in some of the lodges now, you know, since COVID, who have trouble finding the money to pay their fees. So you have a mix of people. So it's a wonderful mixture and a wonderful social kaleidoscope. So there are people that join for that. Then we have, and I haven't spoken, I mean, you saw me pretend to open a lodge. We have a lot of ceremonial work, and people have to learn them. In fact, we have a gentleman in the audience here who sits over there, whose job it is to help train people to do the ceremonies correctly. And some people get a real kick out of it, you know, that you do it properly. And it's a bit like an army thing in some ways. You're supposed to walk that way. You're supposed to stand there. You're supposed to put your feet in that direction, all kinds of things. And some people get a kick out of just doing things very well. And then there are other people who like to join the lodge because they like the history and they like a little bit of the mystique. And because if you want to get into it, there's other areas that you might want to explore, spiritual areas. So people go into Freemasonry for different reasons. And I like all three. I don't really, and some people get totally involved in Freemasonry. It's their lives, like they do with anything, you know. But it's always been part of my life, not my whole life. But I've enjoyed it on all those three levels. And so whatever you want to get out of Freemasonry, people can get out of Freemasonry. And it's like any organization, whether it's a church group or a social group, what you put in, you get out. If you put a lot of effort in, then you enjoy it more. If you just turn up once a month, you don't get so much, but it's still okay. There's no pressure.
Yeah, from that last point, I think it's I don't know if it'd be fair for me to kind of give my impression. I mean, after having read your book, I just finished it a few days ago, but would it be fair to kind of describe Freemasonry, taking off from what you just said, that it's not so much a source of mobilization or inspiration for men, but rather a vessel or a platform, and it takes shape in the different places where Freemasons operate. So for example, you have Freemasons being part of revolutionary activities in North and South America, in France, but in places like England and in, like, for example, in Malaya, colonial Malaya, it's a very conservative um, Freemasonry that is about preserving the status quo. So, uh, would it be fair to describe Freemasonry as not so much a source of moving men, but a vessel and a platform for men, as you say, for men to be better? So you have Muslims, you have Christians, you have Jews, you have Hindus, and that's why it might draw a lot of people, because it's a platform, a vessel for men to operate.
Yeah, I think well, Freemasonry changes. You know, it does change, and it even within the lodges, you can get lodges. I mean, it's like when the leadership of a lodge has got a good leader, then there'll be a lot of enthusiasm. And when you have a poor leader, you get less enthusiasm. So sometimes it works that way. How people react in a lodge. You have the basic elements there. I think these are the building blocks. But what you must, well, the way I see Freemasonry is a system of self-improvement, and it's up to you whether you take it up or not. You either take it to heart and you seriously try to be a better person. At the basic, all the lodges, I think the revolutionary bit's gone most of the world now. I mean, even America, they're very conservative. In fact, too conservative, because Freemasonry's got a bit of a stuck in a rut, is that we haven't changed much. And I think probably we have to change as the world changes, because younger people want something different. So I think that, but I see there's always a basic theme running through a lodge, and that is charity. Whichever lodge you go to, or where any lodge you go to, somewhere in the evening, somebody's going to be talking about charity. Who can we help? Who needs help? And that runs through whether the rest of the evening they spend drinking and do a terrible ceremony, you still find at the end of the day, they put their hands in their pockets. And because Freemasons can't raise money outside. We're not allowed to by law because we're not a charity. So anything the Freemasons do, that money comes out of individuals' pockets. So, I mean, the Masons can be incredibly generous. The ones who've got money are very generous with the money, but we all put money towards some good cause to help in some way. And that is a theme that runs the way through. But I think Freemasonry has more aspects to it, but not everybody is interested in everything.
I have one more question before I open it up to the floor, and you may answer it or you may not answer it. But so, say for example, in Penang, oh no, not in Penang. If you have 3 lanes and 3 lanes on the road, and you're driving, and you see one car parked in one lane, and all the cars are blocked, cannot, so they have to overtake. You know that the person driving that car is a Penangite, because it's only Penangites who would like stop in the lane and not care about blocking it. So is there a way in which you can recognize, say for example, in a room or you're walking down the street, is there any way that you can recognize, oh, he's a Freemason, even though you've never met him? Is there like any characteristics or traits that you could recognize, maybe a secret hand signals or winks of the eye? I don't know.
There could be, but I've never seen anybody do it. They might say something in conversation that might lead you to believe they're a Freemason, but
I've never actually met somebody who's sort of given a sign or whispered in my ear, and oh, that's the password for a second degree or something. No, I've never heard anybody do that. No, well, I got arthritis in my hand, so anybody wants to shake my hand, I'm a little one, yeah.
So we have slightly less than 15 minutes. I'll open it up to the floor for any questions that anybody in the audience might have. We'll address each question as they come.
Why females are not allowed as members?
The reason why women are not allowed in Freemasonry.
Oh, now you stuck me there. Frankly, it's been a tradition and one that should have gone a long time ago. There are women's lodges. English Freemasonry has been very slow to recognize these women's lodges. You'll be pleased to know there's one opening in Kuala Lumpur in next year and another one in Singapore. Can they come to our meetings? No. And I think they should be allowed to come to our meetings as visitors. That's my personal view, but it's not the view of Freemasons in general. Let me just tell you one reason. I mean, there's a few reasons and funny reasons people say, but one of the reasons is, you know, if I'm going, well, I'm old now, so my wife doesn't worry about me too much. But if your husband's young and attractive, and he's going off to a meeting that goes on until midnight, and there's women there, and he comes back drunk, you're a bit worried about what he's been up to. Whereas if he's going off to a Freemasons meeting now, you know he's only going to be sitting with all these boring old men. So in some ways, I don't want to see women in my lodge. But I do believe women should be in Freemasonry, and I don't see any reason they shouldn't be. Forgive me because I'm old and I've got these ideas. Probably shouldn't have them, but I do like the separation. But it shouldn't have happened, and it shouldn't have been allowed to go on for so long.
Just a remark. You are not old, you are just recycled teenagers.
Oh, recycled. That's true. Okay.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, my wife would say that it wouldn't take them 300 years if they were part of a Freemason lodge. Any other questions? The back. Go to the back.
Yes, a couple of points I'd like you to clarify if possible, please. The first one is when I was younger, I had a friend whose father he was a Mason, and he'd always say, well, tonight I'm off to ride the billy goat. So my first question is, what about the goat? And the second question is more serious. In Penang, the first Neptune Lodge kind of fizzled out after 5 years. And then there was quite a gap between the second Neptune Lodge, right? But the second Neptune Lodge was actually prompted because a mercantile kind of informal lodge had started up, and they deemed that there was a lot of riffraff involved in that. And there seems to be some division between, I assume, military lodges and this mercantile lodge. Can you shed any light on that, please?
Well, you've got to remember, I'm not from here, so you take a chance on what I'm saying now. Is there was not the Neptune, if I'm not wrong, Neptune lodges. I think there were 3 Neptune lodges before the one finally that's existing today, which was comparatively recent. A lot of lodges failed and closed because of people leaving Penang. There's a lot of turnover of people. And there's also cases where they didn't want to pay the fees and the lodges closed down. The one I think you're talking about was a lodge that was started up and it was done under a warrant out of India. and they had a warrant to run a military lodge, but they were all civilians. And the guy who was running it was very honorable. And he, when it sort of came to light, he said, look, we better not continue. And he handed back the warrant to India because he wasn't running a military lodge. It was a civilian lodge. And that was what had happened in that case. It was just being honorable, if you want. It was being the fact that it wasn't what it claimed to be. I think they just found it easier to get the okay from India than going all the way. You know, it took so long in the old days. You know, you'd put in an application, as we call it, and you send the application to London. 6 months the ship would take. And I don't suppose they got down to it the first day it arrived. So 3 months later, they'd write and back, and then it'd take another 6. It could be 2 years before the warrant arrived. But between here and India, much more activity. And I suspect that somebody was doing a shortcut. No, that's wrong. I'm only surmising. Huh?
But that one fizzled out after 5 years. In fact, it was due to all sorts of reasons, but a lot of drink was involved, and it fizzled out. But my question was really about, that was 1814, it fizzled out. So it wasn't until 1827 when another Neptune Lodge, the second one in Penang, started up. So between those two, there was this mercantile Freemason lodge. And that's my question was, what's the difference between this essentially military lodge and an essentially maritime lodge?
I don't really know about maritime lodges. A military lodge, which can be associated on a ship. The ships also had lodges. Not so many, but most were military. But yeah, I know of a lot. I mean, I've heard of this lodge that came and went, but it's not. I'm not from. You know, I'm not an old Penang Mason, so I can't answer too much.
You can probably tell my accent, part of where I come from. Freemasonry is often associated with Protestantism. I don't know if that's been your experience. Protestants largely seen as a Protestant and sort of touches on some of the points of diversity, women, and different beliefs and nationalities. I'm sort of curious, and I thank you for dispelling that myth. I had a feeling that it wasn't just for Protestants. Certainly, where I came from, that is probably the central. With the values you have, how does it come to pass that these diversity shortages actually are a leadership issue, or is it more profound than that?
What was that again, that last bit?
I'm curious how this lack of perception of diversity in Freemasonry actually comes to pass. Is it a leadership issue, or is it something deeper or something that we're not aware of? Certainly, there are those prejudices exist. I suspect in different countries they've got different biases. So I'm sort of curious how they come to pass. Is it a lack of that central mission that, of course, is the strength and the weakness of the organization at the same time?
Well, firstly, you've got to understand that the lodges originally, let me also tell you, there is a Grand Lodge of Ireland and a Grand Lodge of Scotland. And, you know, they're all active and they all have lodges. Unfortunately, almost from the word go, the Catholic Church took a dim view of Freemasonry, partly because they were so liberal. If you remember, they took over the ideas of the Enlightenment, and there was freedom of religion. In other words, you wanted to join our lodge, it didn't matter in England, the Grand Lodge, you could join whatever your religion, or, you know, as long as you had a belief in a God. The Catholic Church took a very dim view of mixing with the Protestants and with the Jews. And so a lot of Catholics left Freemasonry in Ireland, and it became institutionalized with the Protestants. And it's also got mixed up with a lot of the political side in Ireland. In terms of whether we, I think we've always been very mixed in the lodges. Perhaps it doesn't come out enough. Partly you've got to understand that certainly in England, a lot of them would be, in the old days, let's say in the 50s and the 60s, which was the high time of Freemasonry, they'd be middle-class businessmen, and they were generally white Church of England businessmen, and the Catholics tended to be poorer, and we didn't have so many nationalities in England in those days. So I think that was part of it, but certainly across the rest of the world, it's always been very mixed in terms of race and religions. And we pride ourselves on that. I would say, having visited the lodges here, I can't say which, very mixed, Chinese, Indians, a few Europeans, not so many, but it'll be very mixed and very diverse. The principles hold for everybody, and these are principles that everybody can agree on. Being good people, being nice to everybody. I mean, these are things, not lying, being true, and being honorable in what you do. This is universal. It's not just Freemasonry. It's just that we hammer it home to you every time you attend a meeting. You are reminded of the kind of person that you're meant to be. And if you keep your ears open and you listen, then you should have this go right inside your head of what you should be.
Question.
I am a retired senior citizen. During my younger working days, rightly or wrongly, the Freemason has always been perceived with suspicion as a secret organization. Number one, why is this so? And number two, what is the organization doing about dispelling that incorrect perception? Thank you.
To some degree, at different times politically, they felt they had to be a little bit secretive. But they also themselves, you know, in the old days, in Penang, when they moved to not to this particular temple, but I think the one before that, they marched in the streets wearing the apron. We're not allowed to, I'm not even sure whether I've broken a law by wearing my apron here. You are not supposed to wear your apron in outside of the lodge. So in the old days, people would see parades of Freemasons, and it was very open. Then Freemasonry started to become secretive itself. And I in some ways, we're to blame for that secrecy. Right now, and I have to say in Malaysia, we have to, or it is felt by, okay, I'll give you an example. When I was living in Malacca, They have a beautiful building in Malacca. It's a tiny little building, it's like a toy house, very small, but a very nice old building. And it's has a long history. And I wanted to put a sign outside because it's in the historic area of Malacca. And I wanted to put a sign outside talking about its history and the fact that we've had sultans as members. And I wanted to put this up. And there was a big debate about whether we should or not. And in the end, they said they don't want to draw attention to Freemasonry in case some political or religious bodies take objection. And so in some ways in Malaysia, there's a tendency for lodges to play it very quiet and not talk openly about Freemasonry or draw attention. So in a way, we don't want to be secret, and there is nothing need to be. Everybody knows this building, for goodness sake. It's one of the biggest buildings along the road. So it's not that we're hiding away. It's just that people imagine things about it, and it's certainly not a threat to anybody's politics or religion. We are not allowed to discuss politics or religion inside a lodge. You know, it's just one of the rules. Partly because in the old day, you don't want to create a problem between Catholics and Protestants or other people. So there was always in the early days they did, but there came a stage where they said, let's not have this in the lodge. And so we do not talk about that. But I say in parts of Asia, I mean, the lodges were shut down in Indonesia. They were shut down by Suharto, and they've never opened. And apparently, officially, they could open. But I think Freemasons are too nervous to open up in there again. We've been lucky in Malaysia and Singapore, partly because we've had 3 sultans as members, and that helped because at one stage they were going to deregister Freemasonry. They were not going to allow it to happen. And luckily, one of the sultans jumped in and said, hey, I'm a member. You give me one good reason why you want to close us down. And the people involved said, okay, and they withdrew. But I understand, and I won't, please don't quote this as true, but I understand quietly that government, anybody working for the government was told, you better resign from Freemasonry. So we have a number of people who apparently, I mean, this was years ago, before my time, but apparently they left Freemasonry unwillingly, but because if you were connected to the government didn't want to see a connection. So there's a lot of history there, but I think the more open, the reason I'm talking today is I think the more open we are as Freemasons, you know, we're not some secret we're not a secret organization. We do have little secrets, but these are like the trade secrets that the old stonemasons had, that's all. Nothing, just to say what degree you're in or what, nothing sinister about them. And that is the only secret. Nothing else is really secret. And if you go on the internet, you can find practically anything, you know, about Freemasons. Of course, you'll find a lot of nonsense as well as the truth, but believe me, there's nothing. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, just to add
to the topic of how secret Freemasonry is, we have a book that's called a ritual book, but it's actually the scripts for the 3 degrees, which were outlined earlier. So the 3 degrees are actually one-act plays. So this so-called ritual book has the script, and it even has the stage directions. So it would say this officer will stand in the northeast part of the lodge to say this next bit. You can buy, anybody can buy it.
Yeah.
Anybody can buy it on the internet. It's not secret.
Yeah, quite. Good point to make. You can buy a book which tells you everything that we do, if you want. It's quite boring if you don't know what it's for, but it's all in the book. It's all in English, Old English, so it takes a bit of understanding, but basically it's there for anybody to read. We just blank out some of the passwords, that's all, if anybody's so interested.
I think we've come to the time to conclude the event. On behalf of Penang Institute, I'd like to thank Mr. Moore for very enlightening presentation and talk, and to the audience for a very engaging discussion. I think with that we can.
I won't say my book is over there if anybody wants to buy it. So it's not a boring read, but it's up to you. I also got my other book on Penang, which if anybody's interested in that, they can read that too. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Thank you, everybody.